First, I'm going to, as we're getting settled here, want to thank Jasmine, who is a third year, is that right? Third year Chaz. What's your major again? CNAS. Well, we'd still like you in Chaz too. UCR student who also works here in events here at the Palm Desert Center. I want to thank her for her work today and, of course, wish you the best in your studies as well. So welcome. Great to see you all. For those of you who are here in person and for those of you who are joining us virtually, I hope that the audio and the video are working well for our, I think, about 30 or so virtual guests, as well as what's about maybe 20-some, 30 people here as well. My name is Darrell Williams, and I'm a professor of history and also the Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences here at UCR. And it's a great honor and pleasure to see you all here together in person and virtually. And of course, it's a great honor and pleasure to be with our 7 scholars who we've been working together now for 7 weeks. Is that right? 7 weeks as well. These scholars are fantastic in their accomplishments, as you're going to see, but they're also fantastic in their educational preparation and aspirations as well. They were recruited from an open call, a national open call for applications across the United States and also Puerto Rico as well, and came to the University of Maryland in June and spent several weeks there. And then we all came here to very hot inland Southern California last Sunday. This is a residential program, a summer research opportunity program, and this residential part is really important for not just being together, but also to reconnect with what residential research and education and being together feels and looks like. I think, if I'm not mistaken, most of you had at least part of your undergraduate education, maybe even part of your high school education disrupted by the pandemic, and you were denied opportunities like this. And I'm very, very happy and grateful and respectful of each of you for taking the risk for doing something that was maybe seemed impossible, at least for part of your educational experience. So thank you for joining us as well. It's also, for those of us, I heard a little bit about some of our Mellon Mays scholars, an opportunity to present research in live three-dimensional space as well. Now, this cohort before us has been working at the intersection of digital humanities, history, and slavery studies, particularly U.S. history, with many of them having their eyes on graduate studies as well. But of course, we have to recognize that this particular group is working alongside a broad range of disciplines and career trajectories of cohorts and colleagues that they've met at the University of Maryland during their first 6 weeks here together. We okay? We okay? Can you hear me? The volume up? Okay, good. All right. Okay, all right. So, of course, we're navigating across various technologies and spaces here. Stand back. Okay, good. We know we're right here. We started out in very green, kind of wet, hot and humid mid-Atlantic, and now we're in very dry, very hot Southern California to learn today about a research process, again, that began for this group in June, but is a reflection of the support of research and research opportunities and some very important research itself that has been ongoing across many different disciplines and institutions for years, if not decades. I want to thank and make sure we recognize the Big Ten Academic Alliance that sponsors the Summer Research Opportunity Program out of the University of Maryland through the graduate school there. We have our thanks and our gratitude for our ongoing and dedicated sponsorship of the project, Enslaved.org, which includes the Mellon Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our host academic institutions, the University of Maryland, Michigan State University, and the University of California, Riverside. This particular year, I am very grateful, and I think we all are very grateful for some of the support that various institutions have provided this year's research journey, including Fairfax County Records Center, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, among others. We have a shout out to everyone here at the Palm Desert Center, including Jasmine and her colleague Lauren, as well as the Omni Rancho Las Palmas Resort and Spa as well. I'm going to turn things over very briefly to my colleague Stephen Niven from Harvard University and the various biographical dictionaries at the Hutchins Center to recognize one of our esteemed guests.
So yeah, I'm Stephen Niven. I edit the Enslaved.org stories pages, and we've got 170 stories on there. And very soon we're going to have two more, one of which is going to be the consequence of the hard work these guys have been doing behind me, and I'm really looking forward to that. They've done a lot of work on it already. And the other one is on a man called George Washington Albright, who was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1846, and who I've been writing about in some way or another for about the past 20 years. I was very happy with the biography I wrote about him for the project. And now I'm able to collectively with his great granddaughter, Karen Birch, who's sitting here, really improve on that story and tell what was already a fantastic story of, resilience, fighting for equality, that didn't end when he left the legislature in Mississippi. It continued on to Kansas, and it continued on to California, even into Riverside at one point in time, and then it continued for him on to Colorado, but for the family, it was mainly in LA after that. So I'm really pleased to finally meet Karen Birch, who's here, and just want to recognize her, and just to say we're not that far away from the time period that we're looking at here. And I think the students here are going to be, helping us to understand that in the same way that Karen and her stories and the work of her family has done for me. So thanks for being here, Karen.
Really quite honored that you were able to join us. Thank you so much and share some of your knowledge and some of your family as we learn more about knowledge and families in other enslaved histories here in the United States. So part of that knowledge and those histories requires this year a special recognition to a very special partner who have joined us this year, and we'll learn more about that partnership. And that is Tudor Place Historic House and Garden, which is located in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown specifically. I'm going to read just a little bit about this. Tudor Place, as we'll learn, dates back to the late 18th or early 19th century as a place of enslavement and a place of the growth of wealth and prestige for enslavers, among others here. The Tudor is now a historic house and site of public visitation, education. And there's been a lot of work taking place at Tudor Place among the curatorial staff, the educational staff, the directorship, with the Board of Trustees, and with the larger community to tell and retell these histories of this particular site, including some very important, overlooked, underestimated histories of its relationship to enslavement and enslaved lives and experiences here. So through the sponsorship and partnership from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, Tudor Place was able to secure a grant called Inspire with an exclamation, which is a 2-year grant to Tudor Place to conduct and compile research and reinterpret enslavement at the site. This work has spurred collaboration between Tudor Place and other archives, museums, and organizations, including Enslaved.org. This has coalesced into a rigorous docent training on inclusivity and balance of information, reevaluation of language usage, reinterpretation of the site, and a thorough investigation of internal and external sources. In addition to this work taking place in the museum and in the site, the 2023 Landmark Lecture Series, which is sponsored by Tudor Place, has been focusing on the interpretation and research of enslavement at the site, among others. This includes a panel discussion with the descendant community of Tudor Place, which took place in October. And there's a planned special installation and tour in spring 2024 that will focus exclusively on the enslaved laborers and families associated with Tudor Place. Tudor Place's goal is to share the stories of enslaved persons in a way that provide agency and discusses their humanity. So I want to thank I want to recognize the work that they've been doing and thank them for opening up that work to our scholars and this partnership here. Haley Wilkinson joins us from Tudor Place itself, and she is the lead on this grant, and it's just been great partnership. So thank you so much. And thank all of your colleagues as well for inviting us to join me. So there are also many other folks here who've been part of today's work here, in person and virtual. I want to make special mention of the faculty leads for this summer's work. University of Maryland professor of history, Quincy Mills, who's right here seated with us, UMD clinical professor, Christina Poznan, who's there joining us online. Today's presentation is going to be live streamed and is also being recorded and will be made available for post-event viewing in about a week. We'll begin with our scholars and then move on to a question and answer session across in-person and virtual, and then preview a rough cut of a podcast of this work that Marisol Filo, one of our associated faculty members, has been working on since her arrival on Sunday. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dylan Bales from the University of Maryland, who will introduce the team and the themes that they've been working on.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And I would also like to thank all the students, faculty, scholars, and guests who were able to attend in this wonderful California weather that we are having here. Hottest I've ever seen. And also everyone who's attending virtually, including our wonderful friends from the SROP Summit Program. My name is Dylan Bales. I use pronouns I'm a recent graduate from the University of Maryland College Park with a bachelor's in American history. And I'm also an upcoming graduate student in the fall for the University of Maryland for their dual master's program in history and library.
Good afternoon. My name is Camelia Bell. I am a recent graduate, or I'm sorry, I use she, they pronouns. I'm a recent graduate of Norfolk State University with my bachelor's in history, and I minored in English.
Hi, everyone. I am Victoriana Mejia. I use she, her pronouns. I am from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. I am a double major in public history and international global studies.
Hello, everybody. I'm Summer Mathis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a rising senior at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. It's a mouthful. And I double major in history and clinical psychology.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Pineda. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of California, Riverside, where I got my bachelor's in history.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salome Ayer Sanchez. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a rising senior at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, with a double major in theater and art history and a minor in women's and gender studies.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoe Rivera. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a rising senior at Pitzer College majoring in American Studies. And today we'll be presenting the final product of our 7 weeks of research, Tempering Personhood from Paper, Enslaved, Free, and Disabled Black Experiences from an Enslaver's Daybook, Georgetown, DC, 1796 to 1799.
For the technical difficulties there. So I will be reading the commitments and intentions of our group to this scholarly research as our statement of ethics. The Enslaved.org summer research cohort utilizes Black digital humanities practices in unearthing and radically revitalizing the lives lived within the largest recorded history of human trafficking, African enslavement. This research aims to center the experiences of expansive Black voices as they have been subjected to the systemic violence of perpetual bondage. We aim to curate a shared consumption of confrontational scholarship by increasing the accessibility of our research to wider communities, families, scholars, educators, and organizers. Currently, there remains a reluctance to center Black voices within educational, legal, and political contexts. and an ongoing international effort to erase expansive marginalized identities. By presenting our project of data collection and research, we welcome the public to recognize the importance of reparative work. Together, we can supplement slavery and disability studies to uplift descendant research and to understand its complexities.
And with that, we are also going to give a content warning. Prior to our presentation, certain items and dialogues are considered difficult history in the context of revitalization and expansion of Black communities. A trigger warning will be displayed in order to create a safe space that centers mental and emotional health, as well as thoughtful care of the lost and stolen lives being centered in our research.
So to get you all thinking about the broader implications of our work, here are some grounding questions that I would like for all of you to ponder as you move through our presentation. What lived experiences of enslavement can be recovered from the sparse and inhumanely recorded information within the Peters Daybook? What effects do the historical delegitimization and division of the Black family in colonial documents have on reparative archival and genealogical work? How does the historical erasure of the intersection between enslavement and disability constitute an omission of Black history? And finally, how can subversive historiography, history that seeks to overwrite the master narrative, inform new community organizing principles and practices?
On our next slide, I'm going to give you some context about enslavement in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Specifically in the 18th century to the early 19th century, DC, Maryland, and Virginia were slave societies. They relied on the exploitation of enslaved Black people's forced labor to maintain their economic, social, and political hegemony. Since our focus period of 1796 to 1799 is before the banning of the transatlantic slave trade in 1808, the labor structure varied in the mentioned regions. So in DC, there was more of a forcing of enslaved and hired out laborers to construct its infrastructure and to maintain the enslaver's household, while Maryland and Virginia were plantation economies, which exploited enslaved people for the crash crop of tobacco cultivation. So originally, Georgetown was a province of Maryland beginning in 1751 and positioned across the Potomac River. However, by 1790, Congress passed the Residence Act and the District of Columbia went through a retrocession, which divided land between Maryland and Virginia, and basically concluded the District of Columbia as the nation's capital and as a Southern territory as well, which perpetuated the enslavement of Black people. This would also include the 1871 Consolidation Act, which also went on to force Georgetown to conform with Washington, D.C.'s authority. So that's kind of how all of the different geographies of our research come together, as well as the Virginia's Eastern Seaboard, which was closely connected to Maryland and D.C., making the domestic and international human trafficking easier and much more immediately traumatizing for enslaved people, while also imperiling small communities of freed people forced to navigate this large slave society. And this is just the map. Oh, sorry. The map on this slide is a GIF as well, representing the evolution of DC from 1790 to 1871. So as you can see, the borders changed from 1790 to include just Georgetown as its own territory until 1871 when it was included as Washington, D.C.
So this is an extra visual of the map of DC in 1800. We are going to be focusing on Georgetown. So it's going to be in this area right here.
Okay. So as you can see, we've included a map of Georgetown from 1796. So the location in which our research originated, as Tori said, is situated in Georgetown before it was made a district of Columbia, or I'm sorry, a district of Washington, D.C. So actually, the small community, it was a very small community, as you could see from the last map. It was kind of just tucked away in the corner. So though it was a small community, though, it housed many prominent figures of slavery and its enslaved Black victims. So looking closer at the portion of the map that we've circled, um, that specifies, or I'm sorry, that specifies the plot. If you look at the second picture, owned by F. Lowndes, who was actually one of the original owners of that plot before they sold it to one of the enslavers we will be talking about in our research, the Peter family specifically in 1805. So specifically, the named place that we're going to be talking about in terms of where we got our primary document is called Tudor Place. It is specifically the home of the enslaver Peter's family, surrounding modern-day 31st and Hugh Street in Washington, D.C. Moving on to the familial context. So, and specifically in terms of the enslavers of our research and the enslaved Black communities that we have stemmed from. So again, the enslavers of focus is called the Peter family of Tudor Place. As you can see on the family tree provided by Tudor Place, there are a litany of family connections going on, as well as an inclusion of the enslaved Black families forcibly associated with the ancestral site. And you can see that to the left here, and then the enslaver families to the right. Yes, so sorry. So circled on the screen here, you can see Thomas Peter and Martha Park Custis Peter. Well, first of all, prior to their marriage in 1795, Thomas Peter, 41, was the legal guardian of Martha Custis Peter when she was 18 years old, which meant he had authority over all of her possessions. After Martha Custis Peter's father, John Jackie Park Custis, dies, I'm sorry, AKA Jackie, yeah. In 1796, he died intestate, which means he died without a will. She inherited the individuals that he kept in bondage, though John Park Custis's father, Daniel Park Custis, for reference, was also one of the first mayors of Georgetown in 1790 before it became a part of Washington, D.C. So that also lets you know there's like a lot of different connections geography wise, but also just familial contextualization. Once Thomas married into the Custis family specifically, he took possession also over the enslaved peoples that were forcibly living within the Custis family as well. So more broadly, Martha Custis is related directly to Martha Washington, who was George Washington's wife by way of her father, Jackie, because Jackie was Martha's stepson from her prior marriage to Daniel Park Custis, who owned a site of enslavement, Arlington House in Arlington, Virginia. So if you were to look at a map of DC, Virginia, and Maryland, you can kind of see there are a lot of like close geographic connections with these families as well. So in the history of Tudor Place's archival record keeping, the very last member of the Peter family to own the home, who was named Armistead Peter III, was integral in preserving the histories of the site. In 1965, he published a book about Tudor Place, specifically in addition to recording information regarding the families of the enslavers and portions of the enslaved lives. Representing the proximity of enslaved Black people to their enslavers, specifically in this image alone, there is a family tree of individuals who were forced to produce labor on the sites of Tudor Place and those in relation to the families. But regardless, since these enslaver families maintained their wealth and status through the continuous trafficking, exploitation, and dehumanization of Black families, tragically, there remains gaps in the histories of their lives and experiences from birth to death, and we aim to help restore them.
So our primary source was in collaboration with Tudor Place archivists and historians such as Haley Wilkinson, who we have the pleasure of having us for join today. We acquired a primary source called Thomas Peters' account book. This book record holds information on enslaved, free, and disabled Black people, families, and communities from the time period of 1796 to 1790.
So as said previously, we are going to have a trigger warning. So the following images and content elaborations will be represented contain sensitive material depicting the physical primary document of the enslaver Thomas Peters' Daybook, consisting of names, ages, and values of enslaved Black individuals. Please note that much of the material, history, and language surrounding these details may be challenging to engage with. So if you would like to leave the room, now please do so.
So we would first like to start talking about the physicality of the document itself. For the first week of our research, we were looking at a digital version of the document. So there were a lot of details that were unclear until we actually had, we were able to like physically touch and also like check through the book ourselves. This book is no larger than a small novel that someone would carry in their coat pocket. That was specifically the intent of this form of daybook. A daybook allowed you to like make accounts, and gradually it was sort of like a receipt that you would carry around and list your finances while Thomas Peter was making like daily transactions. The book itself is two-sided, so on each side of the book holds a certain amount of transactions on each side, and then you flip it, which holds another size of transactions, with the patrimony list and inclusion of enslaved individuals being on one side of the slide. So we know this book is attributed to Thomas Peter thanks to the work of Peter Armistead III, who is a descendant of Thomas Peter, who made a specific effort to archive a lot of the material at Tudor Place. We know this both by like the attribution and also like the actual inscription, because it was graphite, which is around at this time period, but is anachronistic to the period. So we knew there were different authors when we were going into this research for this specific part of the document. The document is attributed to Thomas Peter, later of Tudor Place. And further talking about the inscription of Thomas Peter III, it mentions that it includes a list of enslaved people, how it was inherited from his wife Martha Custis from the death of Martha Custis's father, Jackie Custis, and in being one of the 4 children that she received a fourth or of 2/3 of his mother's dowry. So it includes that, and also a number of enslaved people at the death of her father, John Puerto. And now we're going to start talking about the context of the daybook itself. The largest account of enslaved individuals in this book is the patrimony list. The patrimony list includes the names of 61 individuals, all of which who were enslaved by the Peters. The categories include name, ages, and values, with the values being in Virginia pounds at the time. And I really want to call also the kind of situate this document. So the Peters' wealth is entirely based on the institution of slavery itself. And you can see this in that the first mention of finances in this book revolve around slavery. It constitutes the majority of their wealth, and as we can see from the documentation of their family tree, it is at the behest of the genealogy and the family histories of enslaved people. So you can see how dehumanizing this is from the amount of information that's provided for these families in contrast to the families that were enslaved by them, which is further elaborated on when we talk about disabled individuals later I would also like to include that using this information, we were able to find what we describe as family groups. As you can see from this red bracket, we have Peter Twine, Ellie, Dinah, Macklin, Lydia, and Fanny. The way that we were able to find these family groups was based on common like reporting practices, and we noticed patterns within the document itself, and that assumed genders of male and female names at older ages were listed first, and then followed by several adolescent names. And using that as a basis for our guidelines or for our methodology, we were able to piece together what we believe are the family groups of these enslaved individuals. And talking to the next part of content, we have 2 sale events listed within the same year of this patrimony list. And I think this time period really shows the instability and kind of volatility of enslavement at this period, and that these family groups that we are describing are very often separated, and in some of these cases also maintained by these sales. We see an example of Elsie in this list, who has a family group, and she is separated from her mother in just less of a year of being transferred from another property. So you can see like the instability that really comes from this transfer of.
So I'm going to be talking about another part or portion of the document, specifically the transaction section of the document, which you would see a little past the patrimony listing when you first open up the book. So in transcribing this page, we know this transaction history originates in Georgetown. You can see that at the top of the page there, Georgetown, December 29th, 1796. Specifically, it starts with the label of brickyard right here. And then it goes on to list the transactions, or really the differing transaction formatting to person, labor done, sometimes duration, and then varied amounts of monies or values, or values in terms of the transaction. So name, labor done, and then duration. And then this would be the specific amount in transaction. So specifically, this is illustrating the transactions of labor between free Black individuals and the enslaver family, or I'm sorry, the enslaver Peter's family. So we know from conversations with Heather Bollinger, archivist and historian at the Fairfax County Circuit Court, as well as Haley over at Tudor Place, that supplemental research would reveal that these individuals illustrated in the transaction section of the document who are displayed as Negro were free Black people and not enslaved Black people. For example, to Negro Bob tempering right here, 1 week. From this, we infer that a free Black man named Bob was doing some kind of heat treatment work for the Peter family, possibly performing some kind of construction of their properties. However, because of the limited information provided on their names, their surnames, their age, or any other supplemental biographical information, the course of these individuals' lives after this particular temporal and spatial moment is unknown. However, this depiction is a very clear indication of the vast experiences of free Black people in the wider Georgetown/DC area, specifically in terms of how these men were being racialized and dehumanized in relation to the exploitation of their cheap labor.
Okay, so I'm going to begin talking about the methodology that went into creating our final collaborative data set. So using the original source, Thomas Peter Daybook or /account book, we constructed a rough draft of the data set to first comprehend the transcription and analyze it to have a better understanding of what we could begin to say about the lives of the enslaved individuals mentioned in the source. So as a first step, many of us started using the information already presented in the source to create categories such as name, age, and value. And this was all made into a Google Sheet. And after that initial step, it was up to us to further construct our own individual data sets. So it would help us begin to think about how we want our final collaborative data set to look like what information can we extract from these enslaved individuals. And so, for example, after combing through the transcriptions, we noticed a couple of factors that struck out to us individually that we wanted to emphasize or highlight in our own individual data set. So, for example, I wanted to focus on familial relationships, so I made a note of that. In my spreadsheet, I added a relationship category so I could keep track of these family units. One another of us focused on age, gender, and valuation, trying to make this connection that labor was gendered, thus because they saw that females and males were valued differently in the Daybook. And another one of us focused on the separation of families. So like Cam and Dylan have mentioned, we discovered a pattern of familial relationships. And later on, when we got to the transactions of the Daybook, we realized that families were being separated. So they accentuated that in their notes. So all of this added information is beginning to add contextualization to slavery at the time, but it's also adding information to the types of marginalization it's enacting on these enslaved individuals, such as the separation of their families, and not just exploited labor, but the layers of exploited labor that comes with being a female or a male. And so after sharing our data sets, we began to work together in order to create a collaborative final data set. So before we began to add these new categories to the joint data set, we engaged in a lot of productive conversation to ensure that we were confident about the transcription and the meaning of the source. So we clarified the meaning behind the language in the account book. A lot of the transaction section is riddled with accounting language. So a lot of it, we read it and we were like, okay, what does this mean? So for example, there was language such as to stock, Negro sold, or by cash, Negro sold. So we had to make sure we understood where these enslaved individuals were being sold and to whom, et cetera. And as Cam mentioned, we consulted the paleographers and archivists who had experience working with these account books during this period of time. And so after understanding this information, documenting it into the data set, we began to confront the sad reality that family groups were in fact separated by these enslavers. You can see here, here's one example. By stock, Negro sold, and sometimes this would be considered a family group. And all of this, and they were separated. So we had to confront this sad reality, but we also want to stress this information in our data set to force our audience to confront this information as well and begin to not only foster empathy and understanding, but to recognize the types of oppression enslaved individuals underwent. We also made sure that we were getting the names of the enslaved individuals correct, especially if they were misspelled or if a name was mentioned twice. So this became important to clarify since it determined what we can say about them and how we document them in the data set. So for example, there was a young girl, Else. She was mentioned on the patrimony list, age 9, and she was valued at 30 Virginian pounds. But later on in a transaction section, there was a young girl labeled Elsie, and she was valued around 28 Virginian pounds. And so this raised a lot of confusion, a lot of questions. Is this the same person? Or are they different? And we assumed it was a shortened version or a spelling variation of her name that wasn't too consequential. And we also noted how she was valued at around the same price in the patrimony list and later in the transaction. So we felt more confident saying that this was the same person. So it was a lot of cross-referencing to ensure individuals were either the same or different when repeated. And we also ensured we had all of the enslaved and free individuals documented in the data set. So like Cam has mentioned, there was inclusion of free individuals, and we came to the decision that, oh, well, we don't just want to document the names of the enslaved individuals, we also want to document the names that we assume to be free. And so with all of these decisions, individual and collaborative, we were very intentional in centering the lives of the enslaved in our data set and supplementing new categories to ensure all of their information was documented. So by finally creating these additional categories, we've offered a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of these enslaved individuals to not only restore their humanity, but challenge the dominant narrative of the enslaver who has already documented them as simply property, not human beings. So originally, from the enslaved perspective, we only know three things: their name, their age, and their valuation, basically the details that were only relevant to them. And after we felt more confident in all these decisions, we finally began to create these additional categories in the data set to begin further humanizing these enslaved individuals beyond those original three pieces of information.
So with that, we ended up finishing up with 21 columns total. Each column is relevant for what we felt was important to give them a place in history. So we have columns such as source placement, person's ID number, registered given name, and even special markings next to their names, because these special markings may have had extra information towards them, whether that be they were marked off to be sold or they were kept or whatnot. So we ended up making sure that we had a column associated next to their name with special markings to record that. And to make sure that we understood what we were also talking about jointly, we wanted to make sure that the public understood what we were saying as well. So we made a data dictionary to go with every single column that we wrote down. So we have assigned aged as our first example on here. Again, there is 21 columns, so I couldn't fit all 21 on here, but for quick examples, the assigned age, which was the age of an enslaved individual in years as recorded by the enslaver. So the age did vary, and they may not be accurate to them at that time, but it is recorded by the enslaver. But for our accuracy in this primary document, we wanted to be as precise as possible. There was an individual who was marked at 6 months, but on a data sheet on Excel, we couldn't exactly put 6M on there to mark that he was 6 months. Instead, we put 0.5 because that was just as accurately as we could get. We also wanted to use inputted gender. So the gender of an enslaved individual is interpreted by us. So the masculine and feminine sounding names went with M or F. And we also did do other research to make sure that their names were common names in the 18th century for that type of gender. We did refrain from using biological sex because that term is based on the genitalia of an enslaved individual. We already know that they were dehumanized, and so we didn't want to use that as a term because then it would further dehumanize them present day. And so we also wanted to note that what they faced as the gender that they were also, it was abuse. And depending on a gender, a person's, say a woman would have been used for reproductive their reproductive capacity. We also made sure to give them back personhood. So our, the person's ID number was ENS for enslaved, PER for person, and then the last 4 digits to make sure that we can accurately find them in the data set. We also made sure to even include the 3 people that were recorded on the document within our data sheet to make sure that we had them written down so people could find them later. So for example, that we have written down on the example side, enslaved person 006, we know that that was a person named Sal, and free person 0003 was named Charles. Sorry, don't case. And so family connections was also very, very, very important to us. So we wanted to make sure that we had assumed family groups. Again, previously stated by Dylan, Cam, and Summer, we are continuing with confrontational restorative scholarship approach. And so as a cohort, we decided that family reunifications would be a central feature in our data set. And so again, as one of the examples or the photos that was presented earlier, it showed the male's name, female's, again, this is sounding name, and children's ages listed beneath them.
When we were first given the Daybook, one of the things that immediately caught our attention was at the end of the patrimony list. There were three names, Mima, Molly, and Nana, that were categorized differently than the rest of the enslaved within the patrimony list. Mima, Molly, and Nana were labeled as invalids, and they were not attributed ages or values, leaving very minimal information about them available to us. And as you can see, their names are going to be on the right side of the document at the end with Mima, Molly, Nana. And we believe that it's Dina Ramy Berry who said it best in her book, The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, by stating, enslaved people were valued in life and in death. But because they were people and property, multiple sets of values encompass them and were placed on their bodies. Value is used here as a noun, a verb, and an adjective. It is active, passive, subjective, and reflexive. We took an unconventional approach of focusing on the individuals we knew hardly anything about, as their identities were stripped away the farthest, and we wanted to bring their narratives to the foreground. We are doing this by looking at the individuals, Sal and George, on the November 10th, 1796 Georgetown transaction page on the right of the screen, within the Daybook, as they are labeled invalid and insane, respectively, when 6 months prior they had no categorization of disability.
As Summer stated before, unfortunately, due to the ignorance from enslavers, there is no acknowledgement of the humanity of the enslaved, and there's little to no information regarding the biographical data of Mima, Molly, and Nana. While looking around is it better? Okay. While looking around multiple inventories of enslaver John Park Custis in the counties of Northampton, King William, and New Kent, we stumble upon variations and misspellings of their respective names documented as Molly, Moll, Mal, Molly, and Nana, Nan, Nanny. Furthermore, it became increasingly difficult to gather information on Molly, Nana, and Mima due to their ages being left out of all documents. As Brianna mentioned, while going through the Daybook, one thing that piqued our interest were the disability markers. As once an enslaved person had this mark, they were entirely stripped out of any other relevant information, such as age and valuation. This is where slavery and disability studies meet and come hand in hand. With these considerations, we can say that those enslaved who weren't capable of sufficient productivity were still uploaded somewhere. Enslavers would rent them out, which made them remain as marketable. By enslavers marking enslaved folk as disabled, they grew their wealth off them by not paying taxes over the ones deemed as invalid, and also that the disabilities were used as an excuse to perpetuate slavery, as freedom was considered a likely cause to inducing unsoundness on Black people. In Dia Buster's book, African American Slavery and Disability Bodies, Property and Power in the Antebellum South, 1800s to 1860s, she detailed how this argument came from the results of the 1840 National Census, which was the first census to consider the number of insane and idiots, as well as the number of the blind, deaf, and dumb among both slave and free populations. Edward Jarvis, president of the American Statistical Association, compared the similarly low number of blind, deaf, and insane African Americans among the slave population with the much higher number among Blacks in the free North to point out that the independence had a deleterious effect on Black bodies, while slavery protected African Americans from debility. Next page, please.
Enslavers and physicians were culturally blinded to the range of possible sources for the enslaved mental disturbances. Insanity could, in many instances, be likely attributed to mental anguish and psychological trauma of forced relocation. Referencing back to Dina Remy Berry's work, it was a very traumatic and sadly common experience for families to be forcibly relocated from one another. One can only imagine the type of trauma that could be faced during these relocations. In the price for their pound of flesh, an enslaved woman was separated from her baby and started to throw what was described as fits until she was returned to her previous enslaver and united with her child. This research is extremely crucial as we go forth during this presentation, as we look into the family of Sal, an enslaved woman on the patrimony list, whom within a 6-month period was suddenly categorized as invalid, as well as her second to youngest son, George. The work that we as a cohort are doing here is attempting to restore the history of this family by focusing on Sal and George and their disabled enslaved experiences being provoked by inescapable family separation. Next slide, please.
For a thorough understanding of the time and location context, here is a map that depicts Virginia and its counties back in 1781 to 1790. The relevance for this comes to enslaver John Park Custis, as he lived in Fairfax County, Virginia, that is circled on the top, on Abingdon Plantation, and had estates in Northampton County, New Kent County, and King William County. While attempting to do reparative archival research, we looked at the inventory lists of this enslaver in the mentioned counties. Next slide, please. Here on the left, we can see the image of the inventory titled "An Inventory and Appraisement of the Estate of John Park," which is dated to 1782 in the King William County, which is of the most relevance to our findings, because we saw a family group 14 years prior to their first forceful relocation to the Tudor place because of the Custis Dower patrimony list that we have been analyzing for the past weeks. They are highlighted with a red circle on the image on the right, and their names are Bob, Will, and Saul. Next slide, please.
On the left is the 5th page of the patrimony list depicting the assumed family group, including Bob, age 36, Sal, age 36, Will, age 17, Amy, age 14, Kate, age 13, Elsie, age 9, George, age 7, and Ned, age 6. As we can see from this snippet of the document, the entire family also had valuations placed on them that were reflected on their gender and age. However, when looking at the snippet of a Georgetown transaction on November 10th, 1796, we can see that Sal, the mother, and George, the second youngest, no longer have a value attributed to them, and most importantly, are labeled as invalid and insane. As a group, we made an inference that the reason for this sudden classification could be due to a forced family separation, starting with the 2 youngest daughters, Kate and Elsie. Next slide, please. On the left, we can see that on May 10th, 1796, a transaction was made to an unknown enslaver that involved the separation of multiple families, including the family group of Sal and George. On the screen, we can see the names Elsie and Kate as they are separated from the rest of their family, with Kate being 13 and Elsie 9. One can only imagine how traumatic and frightening this must have been for these young girls, especially since they are one of the few children on this transaction that is being sold without their parents. Looking back at the Georgetown transaction on the right of the screen, one can infer that it was possibly this traumatic event of losing contact with their prominent family members that could have led to the classification of Sal and George being labeled as invalid and insane. The sad reality of this transaction is that the family is once again being further separated from their family members, as Bob, Sal, George, and Ned are being sold to another enslaver. This transaction leaves behind the 2 eldest children, Will, 17, and Amy, 14, who are the last of this family group still under the custody of the Peters. The family has now been separated and scattered in, at the very least, 3 separate locations, which was not only devastating to the entire family, but likely affected Sal and George the hardest, as their new categorizations of invalid and insane would worsen as they are removed from a property that they have been at for at very least 14 years due to the information Salome discussed on the 1782 inventory of John Park Custis. Next page, please.
As all of us already know, no academic presentation is complete without a why section. Our research's why is wrapped up in all the national questions that are currently plaguing our political discourse. Why social justice historiography? Why critical historicism? Why critical ethnic studies? So as we already know, traditional knowledge collectives or traditional knowledge collection methods are seldom able to retrieve the personal histories of enslaved Black people. Most legitimate most legitimate hegemonic ideologies that downplay the extent and the ongoingness of enslavement while also normalizing the atrocities committed by the power elite to maintain it. The occlusion of Black people's resistance and basic biographical information from the dominant narrative of enslavement impacts not only contemporary Black people's political awareness and identity formation, but also people's procedural understanding of enslavement. US enslavement, to be clear, was a death-dealing institution that commodified, regulated, and disabled Black bodies while also separating Black families. So, in an effort to forge a pro-people's intellectual course, our research findings point towards the following bullet points. 1, subversive historiography as a justice-oriented intellectual practice. As we know, academic conformism is intellectual stagnation. This is something that can only be countered by the public history work of organic intellectuals like us. Most of us carry generational traumas and move through material oppressions that are the direct products of US enslavement, capitalism, and imperialism. The criticality of our presentation focus, the intersection between Blackness, enslavement, and disability, as shown in the Peter Daybook, reflects this. Secondly, the high capacity of alternative intellectual frameworks for producing reparative, archival, and genealogical work. Utilizing Saidiya Hartman's method of critical fabulation, we fused robust physical evidence with speculative narration as a means of redressing dominant history's omissions. In the case of Mima, Molly, Nana, Sal, and George, this epistemology helped us better understand, 1, how enslaved people were deemed invalid or insane, and 2, how being labeled invalid or insane impacts the Black enslaved experience, especially when it's gendered. The third bullet point reads as such: the importance of interdisciplinary and confrontational scholarship. As we already know, there is an urgent need for scholars to challenge historical accounts that understate, criminalize, or omit how enslaved people reassert their agency. Through our merging of Black studies, disability studies, slavery studies, and the digital humanities, we have broadened the horizons of what can be uncovered about enslaved people. One could thus say that we have established a more direct link between slavery studies and disability studies. Bullet point number 4. The colonial archive tends to render enslaved individuals mute by first deeming them non-human. Reconceptualizing dispossession, commodification, and labor exploitation as disabling processes adds a much needed dimension to the mainstream understanding of enslavement. It's important to remember that our scholarly contributions serve as intellectual frameworks that we want those who are willing to engage in them to engage in the adequate praxis. They're not just theoretical revisions. Our cohort knows all too well that history is not inherently progressive, something I'm sure you all have become uncomfortably familiar with by now. There are tangible ways for you to not just support, but amplify on a physical scale the work that we are doing. Great mobilization efforts include the movement to decolonize museums, coalition building among descendants, and the organized promotion of critical ethnic studies education within schools. These projective actions are not born just from intellectual, but also revolutionary and confrontational discipline. As we confrontational scholars fundamentally shape the bounds of resistance, we must always remember to be on the front lines by, for, and alongside the people.
All right, so we obviously have many people to thank for our presentation, our research, and our guidance. So we're going to take our time thanking each individual one, because literally without them, this would nowhere near be impossible. So we're going to thank the University of Maryland, the UMD Graduate School, and the University of Maryland Arts and Humanities College. Shout out to the SRP 1856 project that is watching us right now. We really do truly appreciate you. Then we're gonna thank the Mellon Foundation, MSU, UC Riverside, UCR Palm Desert for this excellent presentation space. And of course, Enslaved.org, National Endowment for the Humanities, Matrix at MSU, IMLS, the Tudor Place. Thank you, Haley Wilkinson, for coming out and seeing us present, and the Big Ten Academic Alliance. And we also want to personally thank our mentors, Dr. Williams, Dr. Mills, Dr. Posnan, and of course, Dr. Rayberger, for guiding us through this journey, motivating us every step of the way. We also would like to thank our paleographers and archivists like Molly Kerr and Heather Bollinger that helped us to better understand our primary source and its historical context. Without you two, we wouldn't have been able to make the connections, the contextual information that we could have provided for these enslaved individuals. We would also like to thank other members of the Enslaved.org program, like Mary Salfila, who helped put our podcast together in record time. She's been working overtime, and Stephen Nivens and Haley Wilkinson, once again, who has helped us humanize some of the enslaved individuals in ways that go beyond our data set. So we truly appreciate your help. Thank you for coming out here. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you. Are you prepared to take some questions? Yes. All right. So we can take questions from those of you who are in the room and also from online. Maybe we should switch over to our online audience. Let's see if I can do that. Don't mind. Christina, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So Christina and I and Dean Rayberger, who's in the other room, will field questions coming from in person and those of you who are online. If those of you who are online, if you could put your question into the chat, and then those of you who are in person, raise your hand, and we'll start with Mary Casey. And we're going to have to be a little bit creative here with the microphones. We might have to switch this back and forth, okay? Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Mary Casey. I'm a graduate student at University of California, Riverside. I'm also the editorial associate with Enslaved.org's journal. Hey, Christina, good to see you. Terrific job. That was really a wonderful presentation on so many levels. Really, really excellent work. I can't thank you enough for all the time and work you put into it. Two quick questions for you. Talk about the title a little bit that you're using. Tempering personhood from paper. So I noticed the word tempering, of course, comes up within your digital research, and I can tell you put some thought into that one. So maybe you would tell us a little bit more about that. And my other question is, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a group or individually in your work on this project?
Thank you, Mary. Who would like to start on the tempering? Salome, do you want to why don't you just pull the microphone out and then we can.
Okay, thank you for your question. So when we were deciding on titles for our research and presentation, we wanted to include multiple aspects and items that we encountered while we were researching. And one of the most important aspects in our research was the encounter we had with the Daybook itself, which of course it's paper. And what were we doing from this paper? We were trying to, collect all of these experiences from Black enslaved individuals and also free Black individuals from all of this paper. And another term that we came across while studying and analyzing this Daybook was the tempering of the bricks, etc. And this involves hardening things and making sure that they are more solid. So we wanted to, pay homage to that labor that these individuals made by using the term of tempering. And this is how we came along with our title.
So this question challenge.
The challenge I think we all faced with that was that this was emotionally heavy work. There was a lot of mental health days that we just needed to take a break and just say, we're not working on anything this Sunday afternoon. We're not going to do anything. And I think that I would feel that we all agree that after around like 8 p.m., as we were working, we would say, okay, that's enough. We're going to watch TV. We're going to relax a bit. But I don't know if anyone else would like to add on the challenging part, but I feel like that was one of the main challenges we faced together.
I also think a big part of our title was just from this document itself, like it's an account book. Like it's inherently dehumanizing to like include the least amount of information possible about people and just about how they are seen, which is property. So I think in trying to like forge personhood, we're taking more than is just on this physical source, just on this like piece of paper and turning it into telling the story of like a person who existed.
Thank you all. Christina, would you have a question coming in over chat? Good.
Sure. Tori just spoke to this a little bit, but there are two questions in the chat asking how the group dealt with the emotional toll of dealing with such a tragic history. So we're curious if any other members of the team could speak to that.
Maybe I can ask Brianna, because I know you've spent a lot of time particularly thinking about Sal and working with your peers on Sal, to talk about your relationship and how you navigated this.
Yeah, like Tori and Dylan were saying, it was really, really hard to look at this document, especially when there was just so much that was unknown. So the first aspect of it was Kate and Elsie, right? They were sold first, away from the family. And then we were also looking at, because we don't know the enslaver, the part of the Daybook is that somebody else also has a book, and they basically write in their transactions. It's basically to the individual. So we don't have a lot of the information that we need. And there was a point where I saw Kate and Elsie were sold to an enslaver, and then Bob, Sal, George, and Ned were sold as well. And there was a very brief moment where I thought, were they sold to the same enslaver? And so I had hoped that even though they were leaving that Will and Kate behind, that maybe they would come together, but sadly that wasn't the case. And that was also pretty heartbreaking to have some kind of maybe small little hope that they could be reunited, and then it being squashed was really, really hard. And I remember talking to the group, I feel crying most days. But yeah, it was, like Tori was saying, we did take a lot of mental health breaks. As a group, as a collaborative, we were always there for each other, which really helped. I couldn't imagine doing this individually. Just it would take a very, very big toll on us. But yeah. But thank you for that question.
Sharing. I'm going to turn things over to our peer from UCI.
Hi, thank you very much. This was great. My name is Alex Borucchia. I'm professor of history at University of California, Irvine. I really love the way that you connected disability with value, with all the discussions regarding the different conceptions of value and how you put life people's history into that. That was just beautiful and terrible all at the same. I have a question regarding the source, a research question, which is actually two books, one from one side, one from the other, right? Regarding on the one side, the enslaved people, and on the other, work that free Black men and free Black women do for the slavers' family. Did you find any connection between the two sides of the book, either between some people in one side that I would imagine that you couldn't track if one people from the free side were at some point part of the enslaved on the other side, but how you think they might have been where the critical fabulation part in a way may have work on the part of the enslaved and on the part of the free that in times share space. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think as far as the interactions between the enslaved individuals and free people in this source, I don't think there's much of a connection because we know that these people are associated with the Tudor place, but the Tudor place itself is built in 1802, and the type of commissions that these freemen are doing is for laying bricks. So it is very likely that the construction of this property is from in part that enslaved labor, and that the other enslaved individuals aren't on this site yet, and they're at other sites that belong to the Tudor.
Your work at Tudor Place, not only about the Tudor account book, but the kind of the longer histories of labor, laborers, residents, non-residents in the kind of broad theater. Want to maybe share a little bit somewhere between critical fabulation and what you actually know is the historical process associated with this site? Possible?
So just to go a little further into answering your question, for example, like when we were going through the transaction section and we came upon the listing of free, or what we came to know as free Black individuals doing business or labor for the Peter family. Initially, because there is like on the patrimony listing, there is a person named Bob. We thought that there was some kind of connection between the two individuals, but through further research, like we were saying, with Heather Bollinger, archivists and historians at Tudor Place as well, we came to know that specifically how they were describing the individuals on the transaction list and that portion of it connected them to being freed people. Now, whether or not they were born free, whether or not they self-emancipated, that history of those specific individuals is unknown to us because there's not a lot of information in that section given to really trace them anywhere else. But we knew that because they were labeled as Negro, we knew that they were indeed free individuals versus the people on the patrimony listing.
Turn things back over to my colleague, Christina Pausant.
One of the questions in the chat from archivist Heather Bollinger asks, what was the most surprising find during your research process?
I think the most surprising find is when we went to Fairfax, Virginia court and we kept seeing like this name in the transaction section, David Stewart. We're like, who's David Stewart? This man keeps popping up. And then when we get there, Heather is saying that she has all these will books and she's explaining that David Stewart originally was the guardian of Martha Custis Peter when she was very young. And then when Thomas Peter was introduced to the family, that becomes her husband, he is renamed as her guardian. And that age difference was just surprising. And then it makes you connect the dots that, this is how he inherited this property. And it makes you think about how this family is just passing down these enslaved individuals, not from Martha, from her father, from Martha Custis Washington. And it's just an entire passing down of enslaved individuals. And it was just really surprising to piece those two pieces together because it makes you think about the larger geographic area. And I think as well mentioned in the transaction section was a family was sold to Robert Peter. Now, Robert Peter is Thomas Peter's father. So there's just this whole connection of this enslaved trafficking in this one small geographic area. And it's just really surprising, but it puts into perspective, like when you see that family tree, you don't have images of the enslaved individuals. You rarely have their names, but you have all the pictures of the white people, basically, right? And the names. And it's just really surprising and brings it back down to like full circle that, yeah, they were profiting off enslaved labor and they were exploiting that enslaved labor. And it shows historically and in our research as well.
Another thing that I found interesting, especially when we started to really get into what we were going to focus on, was the people on the patrimony list, as well as the transaction section of the document who were listed invalid and insane. And specifically when we really started deep diving into scholarly research on what those two terms meant and how they were very uniquely gendered. And just the litany of possible experiences of people who were prescribed that condition. Like it was really overwhelming. It was very emotionally overwhelming because specifically for invalid people, there is there's not really a narrowed down definition in terms of the experience of those people. So they could have self-harmed for resistance purposes. They could have been harmed by their enslaver. They could have just been like older people who were just past labor specifically. So there's just a lot of possibilities under the label of invalid as well as insane. one of the other things that I know Heather Bollinger was also talking to us about in terms of the label of insane was that it was possible that these people were also self-emancipators. And because of the, I suppose you could say, thought process of enslavers in terms of the, I know we've heard of the stereotype of the happy slave, thinking that enslaved people should be happy to be under enslavement and everything like that. That thinking about that context in the terms of insane or someone being labeled insane because they chose to self-emancipate, or at least as a possibility for the definition of insane, hit me really hard. Like that research and coming to these kinds of conclusions was just very generally overwhelming. The conversations that we had surrounding that were extensive, but just it was a lot. It was a lot to come to grips with, for sure.
I think for me also on a personal level, like I grew up on the Eastern Shore, and in the second large mentioning of the selling of enslaved people, it mentions that they are sold out into the Eastern Shore. And to me, I lived there my whole life, and Eastern Shore, Maryland is, in comparison to kind of DC, Maryland, is a lot more of an agrarian society. It's a lot more rural. And it's something that doesn't get brought up around my area. And it was difficult to think wow, this is something that could literally that could have happened and next to my family. So that was personally something that was very shocking.
A question from audience here. Or now our colleague from UC Merced. Identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Sabrina Smith, professor of history and critical race and ethnic studies at UC Merced. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Y'all did a wonderful job. I think one of the things that I appreciated the most was your intentionality, both in the research process, but also in the delivery of your findings right today. I have a few questions, some specific, a little bit general, and I might have missed this information, so forgive me if that's the case. I jotted some notes here. I was wondering what other kinds of transactions were included in the accounting book, and whether that might offer insight on perhaps this family's involvement in the plantation economy, anything beyond slave trafficking, right? Or the trafficking of enslaved people. And then I was also, the whole presentation, I was left thinking about the term violence, right? I heard dispossession, I heard marginalization of peoples, and I was wondering if there was an intentionality or a reason for not using the term violence, because these are ultimately forms of violence that the enslaved people experience. And then there's the layer of violence that happens oftentimes within the digital humanities as well, right? Not saying that y'all have done that in any way. So I was just curious about uses or interpretations of violence in this context. Thank you.
Zoe, you want to start? Go ahead.
I absolutely adore the nature of your second question, the question about the inherent characteristics of violence, because I know for me personally, the reason why I chose to specify the type of procedure happening to these people is because violence writ large, right? The general term violence is often wielded by the power elite to demonize certain groups of people, right? You have Black Lives Matter uprisings in 2020 being deemed violent, right? But that wasn't an inherently negative response, obviously, or that wasn't a negative response to us, hopefully here. Obviously, that was a righteous reaction. That was eloquent rage articulated against the racial capitalist colonial order that we see today, right? And that also applies to the research that we conducted here, or that we presented to you here, that the enslavers probably would have termed Sal, for example, self-harming potentially as a violent reaction to her being ripped from her family, right? So I would not want to use the term violent to describe what was happening to these people, because of the fact that the term violent has been seized by the power elite in order to demonize certain groups of people's resistance strategies. I find it much more helpful to identify the particular types of violences that happen to these people because of the fact that it points to a particular process that's part of a particular substructure. structure, right? The more specific we are in naming enslavement, capitalism, imperialism, racism, etc., the more likely we are to understand the multifaceted and multidimensional nature of the current system that ensnares us.
I'd like to say thank you, Zoe, for doing the hard question. I can do the easy question for the specifics of the account book. So like I said about kind of the physicality, basically be like kind of like a phone or like just like opening up your bank account on your phone. They had all sorts of records. Like right after this patrimony list, it includes like livestock, which I do also think says something about like the nature of like the dehumanization. It's like we see how horses are like the next most valuable livestock. Like they view this. But it includes all sorts of like transfers for like buying oatmeal to like lending out like a horse to all these different types of like minute transactions through the day. And we see a lot of hatch marks also through the account book. And that just shows to me how like frequently this is being used and also just like is modified. Like this isn't something someone just wrote up in like a few like sessions. This is something that he actively like takes out, makes notes on, crosses out. This is like a very active document in the life of Thomas Peter for this period.
Christina, another question?
Yeah, several people are interested in having the students reflect, each of them, if possible, on how the experience of engaging in this research has influenced their plans for the future, whether it be content or skills.
Would like to start? Want to do a round? Okay, start with Dylan.
So with my introduction, I mentioned that I'm really interested in history and also library and information science, which is like the most fast track route to doing archival work. I'm really interested in doing that kind of work. And I think with the research that we're doing, it makes me question about like the structural like institution of archives itself, like what information is and isn't present and like what do we like value in the archive itself, as well as like being bold enough to make claims of information that isn't always there in archives, especially when doing research on marginalized communities, because marginalization also takes place in the archives office. Hopefully that helps to influence my work.
So my research interests include African diaspora history, Black marinage, Black fugitivity, Black contemporary queer theory. And so a lot of this research and a lot of the work that we've done with this project spoke to me very, very heavily in terms of my research interests, but also where I want to take my scholarships in the future, especially because I do plan on going to graduate school after I take my gap year. Yeah, that's very important. And I think especially in terms of the fact that we focused on disability studies specifically, I feel like I have a new outlook on the history of enslavement as a whole and how it was a disabling process. And to be quite honest, I never considered disability politics and disability studies to be in conjunction with slavery studies. So that was definitely a new research interest for me, honestly, especially in terms of my interest in Black fugitivity and how self-emancipation and just the concept of separating yourself from the wider hegemonic society was deemed something of a criminalization, and how enslaved people and how just general Black communities went about that historically and contemporarily. So it's taught me a lot about my interests and the fact that I may never narrow it down. I will probably keep learning new things and adding on to my research interests. And honestly, being in this program, I think that I've come to that realization and accepted it fully. And I'm just gonna have to maybe create my own scholarship in conjunction with all of these interests. So
I am also going to be helping Cam make that scholarship because I am very much interested in the same thing. So, like I said earlier, I'm from San Antonio, Texas, well, the Valley in Texas. And growing up, I always wanted to become a lawyer. And then last summer, I started doing research on African American history in Texas. And then I realized there is not a lot. Um, Slavery is rarely mentioned in history books in Texas. And I am very much against the censorship of education. And growing up, my parents have always said the only thing that cannot be taken away from you is education. And so now I know for sure I will be going to grad school. I will be focusing on this type of research. I will try to be adding to research in Texas because I think it's very important that it is mentioned that Texas, the reason why we have Juneteenth is because of Galveston, Texas. And again, it's not taught in our classrooms. And so I want to be adding to that type of history, that type of work to make sure that all the students and future students within Texas know why it's there, why we have now a federal holiday, and why it's important to know this and how we're going to be able to progress later and become more inclusive and accepting of each other because this history has been hidden and it's probably forgotten in majority of like Texas minds. And so that's one main reason why I will be continuing and continuing.
Well, when I entered this program, all I knew was I want to go to grad school, but I don't really know what I want to study. So I came in here, but I mean, it was really an interesting topic, and I reached out right away when I saw like the job internship application. And it really has opened my eyes into what this type of research can do. You know, I just knew that I was interested in the history of enslavement, and I was, you know, interested in restoring that type of history, especially because the master narrative has always just been the opposite of what, you know, we've been finding with this research. And I underestimated the power of technology or in digital humanities. I didn't even know that was a word. When I entered into this opportunity, I kept hearing it, and I was like, okay, what's that mean? And then throughout this program, that's essentially what we've been doing. We've been using numbers and data and categories and columns and all of this stuff on like a Google spreadsheet. And I was actually amazed. I'm looking at this data sheet and I'm like, I can't believe the information that we've gathered from only 3 categories. And we've painted the lives of these individuals in ways that you know, archival work has destroyed and things like that. And I definitely want to go to grad school to specialize in digital humanities so I can continue doing work like this. This is really eye-opening. I'm really thankful for this opportunity.
I went into this internship kind of deciding like what I wanted to do in graduate school because I was thinking of becoming like an education director in like museums or going into archival work. And I was just like, okay, maybe this internship could be a deciding factor because we were working with a lot of archival material. This was a really amazing opportunity. And then I went into it and now I feel like I have a lot more options than what I started out with. And I have been left a little bit more confused as to what I would like to study. So that's going to be pretty fun to figure out through this gap year that I'm taking. Yes, and very important gap year. But I think this opportunity was really, really interesting because I focus a lot on West Coast history. So history of Native Americans starting with the California missions. And so this like going to the East Coast, which has a very rich and very like sad and very traumatic history, it was a lot different. And now it's also opened up a new research that I would really like to continue. So it's going to be a lot of kind of deciding what I want to do, where I want to go. I do really want to get my master's in library sciences. So I'm very much thinking of going into the archival route. But now, which one? Haley was smiling early. She's like, got one. but yeah.
Okay, so while applying to this internship opportunity, I came with an open mind because particularly these topics were not right up my alley. I'm more into the performing arts, gender studies, and I was like, okay, how can I, connect my work with what we're gonna be doing in this research? And I found that a lot of it could be connected actually in how we present our narratives, how we constantly rethink and re-question history, that is something that I will definitely take home with me. And yes, the possibility of doing grad school, it's very much present for me. Where particularly or what particularly, I am not sure. I do know that I want to do something pretty multidisciplinary, as I love many topics, but I'm not sure of that yet. But this program definitely gave me the security and confidence that I can go to grad school and definitely go ahead with it.
Yeah. So before before this internship, or before I accepted this internship, I was definitely racked with like existential dread about like what I wanted to do post grad, because I was being one of my professors who recommended me to this program, and B, maybe become an American Studies major, and C, wants me to go to grad school, is on this Zoom. So I feel like I would be doing him a grand disservice if I said I didn't want to go to grad school. But I do think that I want to. I originally came into this internship wanting to pursue a PhD in American Studies. I've always loved education. I've always loved oration, and I always loved critical pedagogy. So I think that's still an aspiration that I'm going to cling on to, but I do think I need a year of rest, because even though this research program was only 7 weeks, it was the hardest 7 weeks intellectually of my entire life. So I think I need a break and to reconsider, not to reconsider what I want to do in the future, but I also really want a break to think about, like, what I want to, do I still want to pursue an American Studies PhD? A, because Africana Studies has always been calling my name, even though I have like disillusionment with the like hegemonic discipline. And then B, like, once I get a PhD, I don't necessarily, like, we learned through like our program has a pre-professional development like workshop character to it as well. And we met with Gershon Aviles, who was our like dean type mentor from afar during like our residential stay. And he was telling us that there are plenty of careers in academia and outside of academia that you can use your PhD for, which made me sigh a breath of relief, because being a professor always seems to be like a financially precarious job if you're not tenured. So as you can see, I'm working through all my doubts and insecurities about grad school right now in public in front of you. So please take this vulnerability to heart. But I do think that I have a very bright future ahead of me regardless. So
Like the confidence there. All right. We are going to have a special treat of a podcast, which has been developed over the last 72 hours by Marcel Fila, which features the voices of our scholars talking and reflecting a little bit on the work they have been doing and will continue to do to complete their publication, which will go to the Journal of Slavery and Data Preservation. But before we turn that over to Marisol here, I'd like to invite everyone who's on Zoom to turn on their cameras. Turn on their cameras if you can. We got Zoli along with Dr. Posnet, among others. Jill Finkel, I'm sorry. So good. Everyone, please give a thumbs up. Yana from Tudor Place, and Heather, and Dean, of course, is in the other room. Thumbs up and wave. Best of wishes. Congratulations. Much respect. All right. So that being accomplished and giving some good energy and vibe in the room, I'm going to turn things over to Marisol, who's going to close things out for us today. Marisol, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Daryl. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, to who's here, and thanks to everyone that is attending virtually. Congratulations. You did an amazing job. It was fantastic. I'm Marisol Fila. I'm a grad student at the University of Michigan. Also a research assistant at Enslaved.org, and I also work with the SROP students in developing a podcast over the course of these 3 days and a half. It is, as I will show you, rough cut. There were several recordings that were made in these 3 days, more than over 50, and I created this 35 or so mini clips that I put together. So it's a draft. version. I welcome your feedback. We'll work on a final version of this. The goal of this podcast episode is to be sort of a companion to the students' presentation and to talk a little bit more about their development as scholars, their contributions, and they will be kind of talking also about what their expectations were and what they will want to do after this, which is what you just heard. So I welcome your feedback after it. It's over 18 minutes. So let's play it. Yes, so we end up on time. Okay, and we created also, yeah, you can play that. I can show the cover art. There's a cover art for the podcast that was created by the students.
Welcome to Enslaved.org Behind the Data podcast. In each episode, we draw from fragmentary evidence in datasets and scattered archival sources to tell the stories of enslaved individuals who were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. Welcome to this episode of Enslaved.org Behind the Data podcasts. I'm your host, Marisol Fila, and in this episode, we are focusing on the 2023 Enslaved.org Summer Research Opportunities Program, SROP, at the University of Maryland, a program hosted by the Big Ten Academic Alliance. In this third iteration of the program, a cohort of 7 students from different universities all over the country spent 7 weeks together working on a research project with faculty and mentors from Enslaved.org and the University of Maryland. Let's first get to know the 2023 cohort.
I'm Vitoriana Mejia. I am from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, and she, her.
My name is Camelia Bell. I am a graduate of Norfolk State University, and my pronouns are she, they.
My name is Salome Ayer Sanchez. I use she, they pronouns, and I go to University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus.
My name is Zoe Rivera. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a rising senior at Pitzer College.
My name is Brianna Pineda. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of California, Riverside.
My name is Summer. I'm a rising senior at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I use she, her pronouns.
My name is Dylan Bales. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Maryland College Park, and I use he, them pronouns.
The primary goal of their research was to transcribe an original historical source related to the history of enslavement and the recovery of enslaved lives in the state of Maryland, to develop a dataset to be published in the Journal of Slavery and Data Preservation, and to share their findings with academic and public audiences. Let's hear more about the document that they had to transcribe in their own voices.
It's a daybook from the Peter family, which is connected to George Washington, and it's dated from 1796 to 1799. And the first part of the book it's an inventory list of people who were enslaved, and then the rest is just transactions, like daily transactions throughout the years. But we didn't want to focus on the daily transactions, we wanted to focus on the people.
Researching and working on site in Maryland for the first 6 weeks, for their 7th week, the students traveled to California to work on their final presentation, the editing of their dataset and data article, and to go through a fast-paced experience of collaborating on the creation of the podcast, writing a biography to be published on Enslaved.org, and doing hands-on work on the revision of a data article. All of that while staying at a luxurious hotel and resort in Palm Desert and having a taste of the heat of the desert in the summer. The program, along with their experiences of living, researching, and working together and in collaboration, has definitely created an impact on them, both personally and academically. In this podcast, we focus on their development as scholars together with their learnings, possibilities, and insights that this program has brought to them. This podcast is a mosaic of voices in which we will hear from the students, but also from their program mentors, hosts, and stakeholders. And since we can't escape the heat of the desert, we'll also hear a hopefully subtle background of the sound of AC, which curiously situates this podcast in time and space, aspects that for the students and scholars have been crucial throughout this journey. Their time together began in Maryland, back in the beginning of June. There, they traveled to Georgetown to visit Tudor Place and had the opportunity to hold the original manuscript that they had to transcribe. The encounter with the materiality of the document, together with the possibility of being on site, of feeling and experiencing its physicality, history, and significance, was by no this journal. Their time together began in Maryland, back in the beginning of June. There, they traveled to Georgetown to visit Tudor Place and had the opportunity to hold the original manuscript that they had to transcribe. The encounter with the materiality of the document, together with the possibility of being on site, of feeling and experiencing its physicality, history, and significance, was by no means a unique experience, as Dr. Darrell Williams recalls.
I think that this encounter with the physical, as we are doing this work with digitized facsimiles and then also creating digital research products, data sets, data articles, data dictionaries. But to go back to this physical, to understand the size of the book, its materiality, to understand that Peter account book was something that was sized and was used, that was within the physical person of Thomas Peter. Also the kind of openness and generosity of the curators, saying, touch it, open it, turn it over, look through, look at the watermark. Even I noticed that some of them literally kind of, you wanted to smell it, to kind of understand this physical thing, 18th century artifact. So that I think is significant.
This physical encounter with the manuscript allows students to closely look at it, to feel it, and to go through a process of discoverability, as Dr. Christina Posnam tells us.
It's just a tiny notation in the document, invalid, next to Myrna, Molly, and Nana's names, and insane next to George's name. And it doesn't give us much to go on. But in talking with the students, we realized that there was an opportunity to look not deeper within the source, but at other sources, specifically secondary historiography, to get at what other scholars have learned about the history of disability and enslavement, and learn more about those individuals' experiences from there.
Let's also hear how the students reflect on this process and its significance.
When we were going through the Daybook itself, we started noticing this pattern that there were some people who were not giving as much detail, as in their age or the evaluation the enslaver wanted to give to them, because it was substituted with a category of being invalid or insane. So that's what really caught our eye while going through the Daybook, and we just wanted to dig deeper into that, because these enslaved individuals were already dehumanized and then given them another category to further dehumanize them. We just wanted to dig further into that and comprehend what was going on, in the context of the time and place, how then could we bring their stories back to the contemporary.
This goal to bring the stories of enslaved and disabled people to the contemporary and to reinforce their significance is also what Dr. Quincy Mills, one of the main faculty mentors throughout the program, understands as the core of researching in the humanities.
They articulated the skill of how to engage in humanity, which at its core is what the humanities is supposed to do. It's to say that this project was not a project to understand slavery, it was not a project to understand how to represent data in a chart. It was a project to understand the human condition.
Centering humanity and bringing historically erased experiences to the present was the core goal of the students as they created the dataset and wrote their data article, which allowed them to make sense of their emotions and the historical significance of their work.
The historical significance section of the data article takes our emotions constructively and turns them into points towards the future of how to do museum work, how to create a people's museum potentially, how to do reparative archival work, because these are things that are entirely possible and also where our emotions should be leading us towards. We shouldn't let our despair and enragement lead us down despair, right? Or we lead us down a path where we don't do anything, but we should use it as a tool to radicalize people.
The historical, present, and future implications of the students' work and the research is also something that Tutor Place reflects on, as Haley Wilkinson, archivist and grant resource manager, tells us.
It's a really big deal. It's something that I think the longer this partnership has progressed and in a pretty short, quick amount of time, the site in general has really begun to recognize what an opportunity this has been, but not just once this is over and how are we going to continue this research moving forward. And so just kind of realizing that centralizing all of these stories of the enslaved people are also going to equip us to tell other immigrant stories that come in the 20th century, and then also it honestly does give us a better picture of who the Peters were and not just the parts that the Peters would want us to tell.
Their goal to center enslaved lives, to recuperate and forefront humanity and contribute to the development of critical scholarship couldn't have been possible without collaboration. Collaboration, writing, thinking, and producing knowledge collectively were, for them, one, if not the most salient aspects of their work and research together.
The concept in the Enslaved.org SROP program of doing it collaboratively, I think it speaks a lot to how it might be reconsidered to be redone in terms of the recovery of Black studies and digital humanities as a combined effort and doing it in a more as a group effort. Because when we're talking about recovering evidence, I would think that it would be better for you to have other people involved in it and other intellects and other interests and other perspectives involved in recovering that kind of research.
In the current political context in the United States, where there is a systematic attack against critical race theory, Black and ethnic studies, abortion rights, and the lives of queer, Black, and trans people, having the possibility to produce critical Black digital scholarship and to question the assumptions of doing digital and archival work has been crucial for the students.
The political intervention that we're making by ascribing names and humanizing traits to these people is a very uniquely Black political intervention. We are taking on a very Black angle in the way that we are trying to contribute to these fields. We're trying to fight back against the slow erasure of every event that has made Black studies what Black studies is by doing a digital Black humanities project.
I think it's made me really question just kind of the intricacies of archives work. So it's made me question more about how things are preserved and kind of the structure of the archives itself.
For Dr. Williams, that is in part what telling stories and history behind the data means.
Behind the data is in part how to read, how to take something that's presented in one way and try to understand that logic, but also to break that logic and to look at different connections.
Political and educational significance and implications of this research and the broader Enslaved.org SROP program is likewise experienced by their host institutions, as Agam Patel, Executive Director at UCR Palm Desert Center, and Dr. Daryl Williams tells us.
We serve as a center about 65 miles away from the main campus in Riverside, and essentially our mission and vision is to extend UCR's footprint out here in the Coachella Valley. This is an even more important aspect of bringing this program here in the desert, but also the journey that the students take from the East Coast to Midwest, all the way to the West Coast, and preparing them to be better scholars for graduate school and their preparation thereon.
Just like last year, we have one student who is from UCR, so this provides an opportunity for UC Riverside students to participate in a national research opportunity program. It is also a reflection of the type of demographics that we have at UCR and the reflection of those demographics in many places in higher education. majority first gen, from a historically underrepresented group in higher education. Give them an opportunity, give them the experience and the mandate to develop their scholarly research and their scholarly research voices, and then prepare them to do their publications and create new knowledge, but also to prepare them for success if they want to go into graduate school. Professional skills that are necessary for them to not just be successful in their own lives, but also to grow and transform these various areas of professional life in the United States.
Preparing the students to their future professional and academic lives are therefore also fundamental goals of the SROP program that can truly spark new interests and open future professional and academic avenues among the students, but likewise bring a variety of personal learnings.
I feel like this program has made me more aware of like the avenues that I can use to use my work. And even if it's not within the grad school, it's beyond academia that I can apply like the skills that I only used here, but find more opportunities like this, because this was really amazing.
Like, it was really interesting to see like some of my group members who were very outspoken, and they weren't afraid to like ask professors like what are you doing in your research, like basically questioning them. I had never like kind of seen that before, and it really inspired me. So I think individually like this like cohort is going to make me ask like a lot more questions and not be afraid to, you know, kind of ask people who are like higher up and like what are they doing with like their research, because it is like really important and impactful research. So
we're like curating this space of collectivism and like uncertainty and just like being free spirits and everything, something that I've wanted to do and wanted to put into practice, but I feel like I actually got to do that here around people who supported me so thoroughly that going back to my life now, I want to get more comfortable in that context with uncertainty and with the fact that I'm still growing and it's okay to just not know.
As they were getting ready for their final presentation, the students and scholars also had time to reflect on how they would like their work, their research, and their learning journey to be picked up by future scholars, but also by future student generations.
I hope that it goes into descendant work specifically for people finding their ancestral histories or finding pieces to maybe the research that they've already done. Definitely descendant work, definitely museum work, especially because like in terms of like the data dictionary part, when it comes to linguistics about enslavement and things like that, I hope that it's applied to these different spaces like Tudor Place and historical houses and museum work when we're trying to present histories to the public and what we want people to think about in terms of like what the language that we use as well.
And another thing I think I want to add, especially for the future group for next summer, is that don't be afraid to just state what you really believe in, because have that and don't be afraid to ask questions, continue asking questions, and just keep researching, because a lot of the stuff that we are going to be adding into this, like especially like with politics, like we need to stay united in this. We need to continue moving and just stay together and progressing towards, you know, inclusive, welcoming type of history.
And I hope it can generally uplift like digital humanities work as well, because I never really considered digital humanities work, especially in collaboration with Black Studies work, until this specific program. And I feel like that has a lot to do with what like Enslaved.org does in terms of like accessibility and finding different ways to present histories outside of physical spaces. So I hope that that's also a part of our contributions. But also like going into what you said, like I think also in terms of like younger generations, I hope
personal learnings.
Like especially like with politics,
individualist way that capitalism wants you to work, you don't have to work like
both their data set and that article.
That they get out of this idea of like individualized work and like individualized research and just the individualist way that capitalism wants you to work, you don't have to work like that. Like we're redoing this concept of like having to be alone in this, and I feel like we've made an example of like community-oriented work and community-oriented ways to go about this difficult history is possible.
Even if their time together ends in California, the students have still work to do. On the 8th week of the program, the cohort will embark on finalizing both their dataset and data article. Do you want to know how their journey wraps up after the final touches to their research project? So stay tuned for the next episode of Enslaved.org Behind the Data podcast, where we will listen to students' final reflections on the program and overall experience. Before concluding, I want to take a moment to thank all who were part of this podcast. This episode wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration of the fantastic 2023 cohort of SROP students and the faculty from the program and Enslaved.org. Thank you so much, Salome Ayer Sanchez, Dylan Bales, Camila Dell, Summer Mates, Victoriana Mejia, Brianna Pineda, and Zoe Rivera. Thank you, Dr. Darrell Williams, Dr. Christina Posnam, Dr. Dean Rember, Haley Wilkinson, Agam Patel, and Stephen Niven. In this podcast, we listen to Jazz Hop Type Beat by Carrick Music and It Goes Like by AJ Hoffman. Lastly, we welcome listeners' feedback as we work to create the final version of this episode. See you soon. Cheers. Thank you for listening to Enslaved.org Behind the Data podcast, a production of Matrix.
We have a cliffhanger there. Gotta work
University
for the next
and
episode.
University of
Thank you, Marisol, so much. Marisol has been working across digital humanities, digital media, lots of different forms and voices, and this is a product of her own research, as well as the way that she marshals those skills that she's learned to amplify the research of others. So in the amplification part, I want to congratulate our scholars. Of course, recognize we're going to see some fantastic collaborative completed work coming out of this work, out of this summer very soon. The presentation itself will be available very soon, but we also are looking forward to your submission to the Journal of Slavery Data Preservation and your biography, your stories, and many wonderful things that you have ahead of you in your scholarly, in your professional, in your ethical and political lives. So thank you so much. Congratulations. And invite everyone to come up, congratulate them. We are going to take some photos outside. We're going to take some photos. I don't know if they're going to be outside or not. It's very hot. As you all know, we're going to take some photos. We want to invite, we have a group of 8 Mellon Mays scholars who are here from main campus who've joined us. So invite them, meet their peers, and also we'll get some photos as well for that. And then invite everyone for some refreshments here. For those of you who are staying on for dinner, that will be at 6 o'clock at the hotel as well. And yes, once again, as I started out, I'm going to thank Jasmine very much. Jasmine Arredondo, right? Jasmine and Jasmine's counterpart who's not here today, but helped us wonderfully as well, Lauren, and then everyone else, Mike and Leticia, who've made this possible for us. Agam, of course. Thank you people online for joining us in this.